Imagine standing in the bustling streets of 16th century England, where the glittering crowns and majestic courts of the Tudors dazzle the eye. But behind those grand facades lie stories far darker, far more complex, and far more fascinating. We all know the names Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, monarchs whose reigns have become the stuff of legend. But what if I told you the real story of Tudor England isn't just about kings and queens? What if the true power lay with 5 extraordinary figures who shaped history from the shadows? Advisors, spies, scholars, and artists who pulled strings, sparked revolutions, and even risked their lives to shape a kingdom on the brink of transformation. In this video, we're diving deep into the untold tales of these unsung heroes. The ones who never made the history textbooks as front and center rulers, but whose influence was every bit as vital, if not more so. They were the masterminds behind policies that altered the course of religion, the silent watchers who thwarted deadly conspiracies, the seekers of hidden knowledge bridging the mystical and scientific worlds, and the voices capturing the soul of a nation on the cusp of the modern age. From a blacksmith's son who rose to the highest echelons of power through sheer ambition and intellect, to a royal sister whose personal choices reshaped dynasties. From a scholar dabbling in angelic conversations and scientific discovery, to the shadowy spymaster whose networks kept a queen alive in a world rife with plots and betrayals, and finally, to a playwright whose words would echo through centuries, crafting England's identity in verse and drama. These aren't just stories of survival or cunning. They are stories of vision, courage, and sometimes tragic downfall. Each of these figures lived in a world where loyalty could turn to betrayal overnight, where knowledge could be both a gift and a curse, and where the fate of a nation hung on delicate balances of power and perception. So, get ready to journey beyond the gilded crowns and royal courts and uncover the lives of 5 remarkable individuals whose legacies have shaped not only Tudor England, but the very fabric of history. This isn't just history. It's a saga of ambition, intrigue, innovation, and the enduring human spirit. Welcome to our channel. We're thrilled to have you with us. Here, we explore the hidden stories and fascinating details that bring history to life. Stories that don't just tell you what happened, but show you why it mattered. In this video, we'll reveal the untold stories of 5 unsung heroes of Tudor England, diving into their extraordinary lives and exploring how they shaped an era defined by power, peril, and transformation. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the legends and discover the real forces that ruled the Tudor world beyond the crowns and courts. In the grand tapestry of Tudor England, the names of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I shimmer in gold thread, woven prominently into the historical narrative. They are the monarchs who dominate school textbooks, historical dramas, and portraits in gilded frames. Yet, like any intricate weaving, the beauty lies not only in the visible design, but in the hidden threads that hold it together. Behind the ceremonial crowns, the splendor of courtly life, and the theatrical grandeur of political pageantry, there existed a host of figures whose influence was both subtle and profound. They may not have commanded armies under banners emblazoned with the Tudor rose, nor presided over Parliament in resplendent regalia, but they were the architects, tacticians, and quiet innovators who, in many ways, molded the kingdom's fate. It is tempting to think of Tudor England solely in terms of monarchs, noble factions, and religious reformations sparked by royal passions. But the reality was far more layered. This was an era of shifting alliances, religious upheaval, emerging bureaucracy, and the first tentative steps toward global exploration. And in the shadows, or at least on the margins of royal attention, stood individuals who used intellect, cunning, skill, or sheer resilience to shape events. They influenced policy, steered economic reform, maneuvered through the dangerous politics of the time, and fostered the arts and sciences in ways that reverberated long after their deaths. One such figure was Thomas Cromwell. While his name is known to some thanks to the meticulous historical fiction of Hilary Mantel, the scope of his actual achievements often fades behind the simplified story of his downfall. Cromwell was not born to power. He emerged from relatively humble beginnings, the son of a blacksmith and brewer, and honed his skills abroad as a mercenary, merchant, and lawyer. His rise was a testament to the growing, but still fragile possibility of social mobility in Tudor England. When he entered the service of Cardinal Wolsey, Cromwell demonstrated a mastery of legal strategy and administrative efficiency. But it was after Wolsey's fall that Cromwell's influence reached its zenith. Serving Henry VIII directly, he became the chief architect of the English Reformation's administrative side, engineering the dissolution of the monasteries and reorganizing royal finances. His reforms did not simply pad the royal treasury. They fundamentally altered the relationship between the crown and the church, replacing centuries of ecclesiastical privilege with direct royal authority. Moreover, Cromwell's innovations in government structure, such as the use of parliamentary statutes to legitimize royal policy, would echo in English governance long after his execution. His fate, sealed by political enemies and a volatile monarch, cannot erase the lasting imprint he left on the machinery of the Tudor state. If Cromwell embodied the bureaucratic genius of the era, John Dee represented its intellectual and mystical ambitions. Dee was a mathematician, astronomer, geographer, and, in the eyes of some contemporaries, a magician. His polymathic mind straddled the line between the emerging scientific method and the lingering medieval belief in the occult. Serving as an advisor to Elizabeth I, Dee was instrumental in promoting the concept of England as a maritime power. His work on navigation and cartography informed the early voyages that would eventually lead to the expansion of English influence overseas. Yet Dee's vision was not limited to charts and compasses. He imagined England as an imperial power bound by a sense of divine destiny. He coined the term British Empire long before it became a political reality, and his ideas helped frame the ideological underpinnings of English expansionism. At the same time, Dee's fascination with alchemy and angelic communication placed him at the fringes of acceptability, leading some to dismiss him as an eccentric. Nevertheless, in an age when science and mysticism were still entwined, his influence bridged worlds, encouraging a spirit of exploration both literal and intellectual. While Cromwell and Dee reshaped the political and intellectual landscapes, another lesser-sung figure, Mary Sidney, Countess of Pembroke, left an indelible mark on the cultural life of Tudor England. Mary was not merely a patron of the arts. She was a translator, poet, and literary collaborator. Sister to Sir Philip Sidney, she inherited his literary legacy after his death and expanded it through her own work. She translated works from French and Hebrew, notably the Psalms, infusing them with poetic grace that resonated in both religious and literary circles. Her estate at Wilton House became a gathering place for writers, scholars, and musicians, fostering a vibrant cultural salon that influenced the flowering of Elizabethan literature. Through her encouragement and financial support, she nurtured talents whose works would define the English Renaissance. In a society where women's contributions were often marginalized, Mary Sidney's intellectual rigor and artistic influence made her a quiet yet pivotal force in shaping the cultural identity of her time. The machinery of Tudor power, however, also relied on those who worked in the delicate realm of diplomacy. Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth I's principal secretary and spymaster, was one such indispensable figure. Walsingham's reputation rests largely on his intricate network of spies, which stretched across Europe and into the very courts of England's rivals. In an age when religious conflict and political intrigue were constant threats, Walsingham's intelligence gathering was vital to safeguarding the realm. He uncovered plots such as the Babington Conspiracy, which ultimately led to the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. His methods, intercepting letters, using double agents, and employing cryptography, laid the groundwork for modern espionage practices. Yet Walsingham was not motivated purely by personal gain. His Puritan convictions made him a staunch defender of Protestant England against Catholic powers. Operating in a political climate where a misstep could cost one's life, Walsingham combined caution with ruthless efficiency, ensuring that Elizabeth's reign, though threatened from all sides, endured. Lastly, there was Robert Cecil, the son of William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who served both Elizabeth I and her successor James I. While his father's legacy is more widely recognized, Robert's own career merits attention. Short in stature but formidable in intellect, Cecil navigated the treacherous transition between the Tudor and Stuart dynasties. His administrative skill ensured continuity in governance during a period that could easily have descended into chaos. Cecil was instrumental in managing the delicate negotiations that led to the peaceful accession of James VI of Scotland to the English throne, uniting the crowns in 1603. He also dealt with challenges such as the aftermath of the Spanish Armada, financial strains on the crown, and the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Though often caricatured by his enemies as Machiavellian, Cecil's pragmatism and political foresight were crucial to the stability of the realm at a pivotal moment in its history. Taken together, these five figures, Cromwell, Sidney, Walsingham, and Cecil, represent the diverse forms of influence that shaped Tudor England beyond the thrones and ceremonial halls. Their contributions spanned governance, exploration, culture, espionage, and diplomacy. Each operated in a sphere that required not just competence, but the ability to adapt to the shifting tides of politics and public sentiment. They exemplify how power in the Tudor era was not solely the domain of crowned heads, but was often wielded by those whose names rarely appear in the headlines of history. Their stories also remind us of the fragility of influence in such a volatile age. Cromwell's meteoric rise ended in execution. Dee died in relative obscurity and poverty. Sidney's literary contributions were overshadowed by her male contemporaries. Walsingham's relentless vigilance took a toll on his health and finances. Cecil faced constant suspicion from those who mistrusted his closeness to the monarch. Yet, their legacies endure in ways that defy the fleeting nature of courtly favor. The dissolution of the monasteries reshaped England's religious and economic structure. The early voyages inspired by Dee's navigation advanced England's maritime tradition. Sidney's literary patronage helped cement the English Renaissance. Walsingham's intelligence work safeguarded the Protestant succession, and Cecil's diplomacy secured a peaceful dynastic union. In examining these lives, one begins to see the Tudor period not just as the age of grand monarchs, but as a complex interplay of personalities, ambitions, and innovations. The Tudor court was indeed a stage, but it was also a workshop, a laboratory, and at times a battlefield for ideas. While Henry VIII's marital dramas and Elizabeth I's political theater draw the most attention, the quieter labors of these figures reveal the deeper currents shaping the kingdom's destiny. Furthermore, the fact that such individuals could rise, or at least exert influence, speaks to the transitional nature of the period. Tudor England straddled the medieval and the modern, the feudal and the bureaucratic, the local and the global. Social mobility was still rare but not impossible. Intellectual pursuits were expanding beyond the cloister, and the state was beginning to develop structures that would eventually define the modern nation. Figures like Cromwell and Cecil harnessed these changes to consolidate royal authority, while Dee and Sidney channeled them into intellectual and cultural enrichment, and Walsingham applied them to the practical matter of national security. Theirs was a world where loyalty could be both a shield and a trap, where knowledge could confer both honor and suspicion, and where service to the crown was as perilous as it was prestigious. The unsung heroes of Tudor England navigated this treacherous terrain with varying degrees of success, but all left marks that extend beyond their lifetimes. In the corridors of power, in the pages of literature, in the design of maps, and in the encrypted letters of spies, their presence lingers, a testament to the fact that history is not solely the work of monarchs, but of the many hands, minds, and hearts laboring just beyond the glare of the throne. Intrigue was the oxygen of Tudor politics, and those who could breathe it deeply without choking stood a chance of surviving, even thriving. These were not passive bystanders in royal spectacles. They were the architects behind reforms, the watchmen in the night, the keepers of the kingdom's secrets, the patrons of brilliance, and the visionaries who could imagine futures beyond the horizon. They worked in rooms far from the thrones, yet their shadows stretched into the chambers of kings and queens. Among them, perhaps none demonstrated the dizzying possibilities and dangers of Tudor ambition better than a man who began his life far from the velvet and marble of court, yet ended up as the right hand of the most powerful monarch in England's history. Thomas Cromwell's story is the embodiment of social mobility in an age that had little patience for it. Born in Putney to a blacksmith and brewer, Cromwell's prospects at birth were narrow and modest. The England he entered in the late 15th century was still, in many ways, a feudal land where noble birth could determine the ceiling of one's achievements. But Cromwell had an uncommon mixture of resilience, intelligence, and adaptability. As a youth, he traveled to the continent, a dangerous and uncertain path for a young man with no title or powerful connections. He fought as a mercenary in Italy, traded goods in Antwerp, and worked for merchants and bankers, absorbing the practical knowledge of commerce, diplomacy, and law. These early years hardened him into a man who could navigate both the bustling markets of European cities and the treacherous currents of political negotiation. When Cromwell returned to England, his skills drew the attention of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, then the most powerful churchman in the realm. Under Wolsey's patronage, Cromwell proved himself an able administrator and legal mind. But Wolsey's fall from grace, triggered by his inability to secure an annulment for Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, might have ended Cromwell's career before it truly began. Instead, it became his opportunity. He insinuated himself into the king's confidence, offering solutions where others hesitated. Cromwell's genius lay not just in understanding the king's desires, but in creating the mechanisms to make them a reality. The English Reformation, so often told as a drama of theology and marital strife, was also a story of paperwork, statutes, and administrative ingenuity, and Cromwell was its chief engineer. It was he who devised the legal strategies that severed England's ties to Rome, transferring religious authority to the crown. Through the dissolution of the monasteries, Cromwell not only enriched the royal coffers, but also altered the fabric of English society, redistributing land and power away from the church and toward the crown and emerging gentry. These moves reshaped England's political and economic landscape, binding the kingdom more tightly to the will of the monarch. Yet his rise carried the seeds of his fall. The court was a place where alliances were as fragile as spun glass, and enemies multiplied in the shadows. Cromwell's advocacy for a marriage alliance with Anne of Cleves, intended to strengthen Protestant ties in Europe, displeased Henry when the union proved personally distasteful. Rivals seized the moment. In a matter of weeks, Cromwell went from being Earl of Essex to a condemned man. His execution in the summer of 1540 was swift and brutal, but the administrative foundations he built outlasted him, influencing English governance for generations. If Cromwell's legacy was one of institutional power and legal reformation, John Dee's influence was of a more ethereal but no less significant kind. Dee was a man of numbers, stars, and visions, a scholar whose mind could leap from the precise calculations of navigation to the mystic symbols of alchemy. Born in 1527, he studied at Cambridge and later immersed himself in the intellectual currents of Renaissance Europe. Mathematics, astronomy, geography, and philosophy flowed into his learning, but so too did the esoteric traditions of magic and the occult. In the Tudor world, these disciplines were not strictly divided. The search for divine truths could lead a man to both the telescope and the crystal ball. Dee's service to Elizabeth I placed him at the center of the Queen's ambitions for her realm. He advised on matters of navigation and cartography, producing and refining maps that would guide the earliest English voyages into the Atlantic. It was Dee who articulated the vision of England as a maritime power destined for greatness, coining the phrase British Empire, decades before it became political reality. His calculations helped sailors plot courses across uncertain seas, and his counsel helped shape the intellectual justifications for expansion. Yet Dee was not content with purely earthly pursuits. His belief that angels could impart divine wisdom led him into years of spiritual experiments, often in the company of the mysterious medium Edward Kelly. This dual life, as scientist and mystic, made him a subject of fascination and suspicion. Though he served the crown, he also retreated for long periods into private study, his fortunes rising and falling with the shifting tides of favor. By the end of his life, he was a figure both celebrated and marginalized, his prophetic visions out of step with an England increasingly focused on tangible gain rather than cosmic mysteries. Nevertheless, Dee's blending of science, exploration, and visionary ambition captured the restless spirit of the age and influenced generations of thinkers who followed. While men like Cromwell and Dee navigated the corridors of state and the starry realms of theory, Mary Sidney, Countess of Pembroke, was shaping a quieter but equally potent domain, the cultural life of England. Born in 1561 into the influential Sidney family, Mary received an education that, while exceptional for a woman of her time, was still shaped by the expectations of aristocratic femininity. She married Henry Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, and managed Wilton House, an estate that would become a beacon for poets, scholars, and musicians. Her literary life was deeply connected to her brother, Sir Philip Sidney, whose death in battle in 1586 left an unfinished legacy that Mary took upon herself to preserve and expand. She oversaw the publication of his works, including the pastoral romance Arcadia, and completed a remarkable translation of the Psalms into English verse. Her own poetry and translations reflected both her devout Protestant faith and her keen awareness of the political and artistic cross-currents of the time. At Wilton, she gathered a circle of creative minds, fostering an environment where ideas could be exchanged freely, and where the English language was being shaped into the rich expressive medium we now associate with the Renaissance. In an era when women's contributions to literature were often dismissed or hidden, Mary Sidney's influence was both direct and enduring. She not only contributed her own voice, but also enabled others to find theirs. Her patronage ensured that works of enduring beauty and significance reached an audience, and her own compositions displayed a sophistication that challenged the gendered limits of authorship in her time. While Sidney nurtured England's cultural soul, Sir Francis Walsingham guarded its political heart. Born around 1532, Walsingham came of age during the religious and political turbulence that followed Henry VIII's break with Rome. A committed Protestant, he fled abroad during the reign of Mary I, returning only when Elizabeth took the throne. His loyalty to the Queen and his ideological commitment to Protestant England positioned him for a role that would define his career: principal secretary and spymaster. Walsingham's England was surrounded by enemies: Catholic Spain, a restless Ireland, and factions at home still loyal to Rome. His response was to weave an intelligence network that reached into foreign courts and domestic conspiracies alike. He employed agents in France, Italy, and the Low Countries, intercepting letters, breaking ciphers, and turning would-be traitors into informants. His uncovering of the Babington plot in 1586 was a masterstroke of surveillance and deception, leading to the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, and removing a central figure around whom Catholic plots could rally. Though Walsingham's methods could be ruthless, they were effective in preserving the Queen's reign. He died in 1590, leaving behind a model of intelligence work that future governments would refine but never abandon. His career underscored a central truth of Tudor politics: survival depended as much on knowing your enemy's intentions as on commanding armies in the field. The last of this quintet, Robert Cecil, was born in 1563 into a family already deeply enmeshed in the machinery of state. His father, William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, was Elizabeth I's most trusted counselor. Robert inherited not only his father's political acumen, but also his capacity for enduring the constant scrutiny and suspicion that came with proximity to the throne. Slight of build and plagued by ill health, Robert compensated with sharp intelligence and an unmatched ability to read the currents of court politics. As Elizabeth's reign drew to a close, the question of succession loomed large. Cecil managed delicate communications with James VI of Scotland, paving the way for a smooth transition upon Elizabeth's death in 1603. This was no small feat. A contested succession could have plunged England into civil war. Cecil's skill in balancing discretion with decisive action ensured that the Tudor dynasty's final act gave way to the Stuart era without bloodshed. His service continued under James I, where he dealt with threats such as the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 and the ongoing financial strains on the monarchy. While detractors painted him as manipulative, Cecil's tenure was marked by a pragmatic dedication to stability in a time of dynastic change. He died in 1612, his reputation secure as a man who could serve two monarchs of different temperaments without losing the trust of either. Taken together, these lives illuminate the Tudor world in all its complexity. It was an age of spectacle, yes, but also of tireless labor behind the scenes. Cromwell built the administrative scaffolding of royal authority, reimagined England's imperial destiny. Sidney cultivated the language and culture that would carry that destiny's stories. Walsingham defended the realm with webs of secrecy, and Cecil steered it through the perilous waters of succession. Each worked within the constraints of their time, yet each pushed against them in ways that left a lasting mark. Their stories remind us that history is rarely the work of a single figure, no matter how grand their title. It is instead a chorus of voices, some loud and commanding, others quiet but persistent, all contributing to the shape of an age. The Tudors may have worn the crowns, but these unsung heroes forged the tools, crafted the narratives, guarded the secrets, and dreamed the dreams that allowed the dynasty to endure. In their shadows, the glitter of royal power was made possible. And in their legacies, we can see the threads that continue to run through the fabric of English history, strong, subtle, and essential. Thomas Cromwell's life was a tale that could have been dismissed as fiction had it not been so meticulously documented by both his allies and enemies. It began in a place far removed from the marbled halls of power, in Putney, a modest riverside settlement on the edge of London, where he was born in the closing years of the 15th century. His father, Walter Cromwell, was a blacksmith and brewer, a man whose brushes with the law were frequent enough to mark the family name with a certain roughness. Nothing in Cromwell's early circumstances suggested that he would one day stand beside a king as one of the most influential statesmen in English history. Yet ambition is rarely deterred by birth, and Cromwell's ambitions were as relentless as they were adaptable. As a young man, Cromwell left England, perhaps to escape both poverty and the constraints of his environment. His travels took him across Europe, first to the Low Countries, then to Italy. In Florence, he served as a soldier in the army of the French, experiencing firsthand the brutalities and pragmatism of warfare. He later worked for Italian merchants, gaining an intimate understanding of finance, trade, and the intricate web of connections that bound the city-states of Renaissance Europe. In Antwerp, a hub of commerce and banking, he honed his skills in negotiation and learned the value of information. By the time he returned to England, Cromwell had equipped himself with a repertoire of languages, a formidable intellect, and a deep appreciation for both opportunity and timing. His entry into English politics came through the service of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry VIII's trusted chief minister. Wolsey's rise had been similarly meteoric, and perhaps Cromwell saw in him both a model and a cautionary tale. Under Wolsey, Cromwell became an indispensable assistant, managing legal affairs and overseeing the cardinal's many projects, including the ambitious but ultimately doomed plan to establish a network of new colleges and schools funded by the dissolution of certain monasteries. This early exposure to church property management would later serve him well. When Wolsey fell from the king's favor in 1529, unable to secure the annulment Henry desired from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, most of the cardinal's associates abandoned him. Cromwell, however, stayed with his patron until the very end, defending him in Parliament and securing as gentle a downfall as possible. This loyalty, combined with Cromwell's skill in navigating the legal and political minefields, caught Henry's attention. The king saw in him a man capable of delivering results where others faltered, someone who could match royal will with administrative action. By 1532, Cromwell had entered the king's service directly. He quickly distinguished himself as a master of parliamentary procedure, using statutes to formalize the king's supremacy over the church in England. His strategy was bold. Rather than relying solely on royal proclamations, he sought to enshrine Henry's authority in the law of the land, thereby making it harder to challenge. It was under Cromwell's guidance that Parliament passed the Act in Restraint of Appeals, effectively cutting off England's legal ties to Rome. This act declared that the realm was an empire unto itself, with the king as its supreme head, a revolutionary assertion that transformed England's political identity. Cromwell's administrative genius came fully into play with the dissolution of the monasteries, a process that began in 1536. Ostensibly justified by claims of clerical corruption and the need for reform, the dissolution was, in reality, a vast transfer of wealth and land from ecclesiastical to royal hands. Cromwell orchestrated nationwide surveys, the Valor Ecclesiasticus, to assess the value of monastic holdings. Commissioners were sent to inspect monasteries, often producing damning reports that served as pretexts for closure. The resulting influx of resources filled the king's treasury and allowed Henry to reward loyal supporters with land, thereby cementing political alliances. The social impact of this policy was immense. Monasteries had long been centers of charity, education, and healthcare. Their destruction disrupted local economies and altered the landscape of rural England. Cromwell's reforms also extended to the organization of the royal household and the council, streamlining processes and reducing the influence of older, more aristocratic forms of governance in favor of a more centralized, bureaucratic state. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for a system of governance that would endure well beyond the Tudor era. Yet Cromwell's rise was accompanied by growing resentment. His humble origins made him an object of contempt among the nobility, while his Protestant leanings earned him enemies among conservative Catholics at court. He was accused of enriching himself during the dissolution, though the scale of his personal gain was modest compared to the opportunities available. More damning in the eyes of his contemporaries was his role in arranging the king's ill-fated marriage to Anne of Cleves in 1540. Intended as a diplomatic alliance with the Protestant states of Germany, the match soured instantly upon the bride's arrival in England, when Henry declared himself physically repelled by her. This marital disaster provided Cromwell's enemies with the opening they had been waiting for. The Duke of Norfolk and other conservative courtiers maneuvered against him, accusing him of treason and heresy. In a matter of weeks, Cromwell went from being Earl of Essex to a prisoner in the Tower. On the 28th of July 1540, he was executed on Tower Hill, the same day Henry married Catherine Howard. The swiftness of his fall was a stark reminder of the volatility of Tudor politics. Yet his legacy could not be erased with the swing of the axe. The administrative reforms he implemented strengthened the monarchy's control over both church and state. The legal precedents he established for using Parliament to legitimize royal authority became a permanent feature of English governance. The redistribution of monastic lands altered the social and economic structure of the country, empowering a new class of landowners who would play a decisive role in the nation's future. Cromwell's life, from the forge in Putney to the scaffold at the Tower, was a testament to the power of ambition tempered by skill. He had no birthright to power, no ancient lineage to protect him, and no inherited wealth to sustain him. What he possessed was an extraordinary ability to see the levers of power and to pull them with precision. In the end, those same levers turned against him, but not before he had reshaped the very machinery of the state. His career was a masterclass in both the possibilities and perils of service to a Tudor monarch, a reminder that in the England of Henry VIII, proximity to the throne could be both the making and the undoing of a man. Cromwell's legacy was as complex as the man himself, and his downfall has been the subject of both historical scrutiny and dramatic retelling for centuries. His execution in the summer of 1540 was not the inevitable fate of all royal ministers. Many managed to fade into retirement or at least avoid the block, but it was the risk that came with standing too close to the furnace of Henry VIII's will. In Cromwell's case, the speed of his fall was almost as remarkable as the height of his rise. His enemies at court had long been sharpening their knives. Noble families who resented being outmaneuvered by a man of such low birth saw, in the Anne of Cleves, marriage the perfect opportunity to strike. Henry's public dissatisfaction with his bride, expressed in coarse and unforgiving terms, created a political storm. The Duke of Norfolk and his Catholic allies moved quickly, accusing Cromwell of overstepping his authority, of harboring heretical Protestant sympathies, and even of plotting treason. In Tudor politics, treason was a malleable accusation, broad enough to ensnare anyone who had lost the king's favor, flexible enough to be applied with devastating effect. The charges were a mixture of truth, exaggeration, and fabrication. Cromwell certainly had advanced Protestant reforms that alarmed traditionalists, and his network of supporters included radical thinkers the king found troubling. Yet there is little credible evidence he intended treason. The reality is simpler and more brutal. His position depended entirely on Henry's goodwill, and once that evaporated, no legal defense could save him. In a court where personal favor was the currency of survival, Cromwell found his account suddenly and irrevocably overdrawn. His execution was conducted with the ceremonial finality reserved for men of great status, but the manner was grisly. Eyewitnesses recorded that the inexperienced executioner botched the beheading, requiring multiple blows. Even in death, Cromwell could not escape the roughness of his origins and the cruelty of the age. Yet his final speech was one of humility and loyalty, reaffirming his faith and service to the king. What Cromwell left behind was both tangible and intangible. Tangibly, his reorganization of royal finances and government structures created a more centralized and efficient administration. The dissolution of the monasteries, though a policy that enriched the crown in the short term, had long-term effects on England's social and economic fabric, redistributing land and creating a new class of gentry. The use of Parliament as a legislative instrument to formalize royal supremacy became a precedent that future monarchs, and eventually Parliament itself, would build upon. Intangibly, Cromwell's career demonstrated that talent and adaptability could, at least in rare cases, propel a man beyond the boundaries of birth. His rise inspired both admiration and fear, a reminder that the Tudor state was evolving away from medieval hereditary dominance toward a system where administrative skill could rival noble lineage. But it also reinforced the lesson that no amount of ability could guarantee safety when serving a monarch as mercurial as Henry VIII. From Cromwell's shadow, we can step toward another figure whose influence has often been overlooked, a royal woman whose life choices and political entanglements rippled across the Tudor dynasty. She was not a minister or a spymaster, but her bloodline and personal decisions carried consequences that outlived her. Mary Tudor, Queen of France and later Duchess of Suffolk, was Henry VIII's younger sister, and her story reveals how personal desire and political necessity were often in conflict for women of her rank. Mary was born in 1496, the youngest surviving daughter of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. As a princess of the new Tudor line, her marriage was always going to be a matter of diplomacy rather than romance. In her youth, she was renowned for her beauty and charm, and her brother Henry valued her as a pawn in the chess game of European alliances. In 1515, she was married to the aging King Louis XII of France, a union intended to secure peace between the two nations. Mary was in her late teens. Louis was more than 3 decades her senior. The marriage was short-lived. Louis died just a few months after their wedding, leaving Mary a widow in a foreign court. Widowed queens were valuable diplomatic assets, and Henry VIII fully intended to use his sister's hand in marriage to secure another advantageous alliance. Mary, however, had other plans. Before leaving for France, she had extracted a promise from her brother. If she survived Louis, she could choose her next husband. Whether Henry ever meant to honor this promise is debatable, but Mary took it seriously. In secret, and with considerable risk, she married Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, Henry's closest friend and one of the most prominent noblemen in England. Their union was a breach of royal protocol and a political embarrassment for Henry, who could have used her remarriage to cement another foreign alliance. The king was furious when he learned of the match, but blood and friendship tempered his anger. The couple was fined heavily, a financial penalty that was more symbolic than ruinous, and they were eventually restored to royal favor. Mary's choice to marry for love rather than duty was remarkable in a time when royal women were rarely permitted such agency. It also had unintended consequences for the Tudor succession. Through her marriage to Brandon, she became the grandmother of Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, whose tragic bid for the throne in 1553 ended in her execution. Mary herself could not have foreseen this, but her defiance of dynastic expectations placed her descendants in the dangerous whirlpool of Tudor politics. In her later years, Mary withdrew from court life, focusing on her family and her estates. She maintained a cordial relationship with her brother, but avoided entangling herself in the religious and political upheavals that defined his later reign. She died in 1533, still Duchess of Suffolk, remembered by those who knew her as spirited, intelligent, and unafraid to follow her own path. Mary Tudor's life, though less politically direct than Cromwell's, illustrates another form of influence, one shaped by personal choice rather than policy. Her marriage to Brandon strengthened his position and tied the Suffolk line more closely to the throne, with repercussions that would surface decades later. In a dynasty as precariously balanced as the Tudors, even a princess's romantic decision could send ripples through history. The contrast between Cromwell and Mary is striking. One rose from obscurity through calculated service to the king, his fate determined by the shifting winds of royal favor and political necessity. The other began at the very heart of royal privilege, using her position to carve out a measure of personal freedom, yet inadvertently entangling her family in future peril. Both, however, navigated a world where survival required acute awareness of power, whether to grasp it, as Cromwell did, or to sidestep it, as Mary often tried. In Tudor England, influence did not always announce itself in proclamations or policy changes. Sometimes it was embedded in the quiet defiance of a royal sister who chose love over politics, just as it could be forged in the meticulous drafting of parliamentary acts that altered the kingdom's religious life forever. What unites figures like Cromwell and Mary is the way their actions, deliberate or unintended, became threads in the larger tapestry of the dynasty's story. The Tudor court was as much a stage for private ambition as it was for public policy, and both kinds of ambition could leave marks that endured beyond a lifetime. Cromwell's reforms and Mary's marriage may seem worlds apart, yet both reshaped the political landscape in ways they could not fully control. That lack of control, over fate, over the will of a king, over the tides of history, was the one constant in an era defined by volatility. Emerging from the shadowy corridors of power and the delicate intrigues of royal kinship, the Tudor era also gave rise to a figure whose influence stretched beyond the immediate political realm and into the realms of knowledge, mysticism, and the very fabric of the Renaissance itself. John Dee was a man who embodied the spirit of an age caught between medieval superstition and the dawn of modern science, a polymath whose pursuits ranged from mathematics and navigation to astrology and alchemy. His story offers a window into how intellectual ambition intersected with the demands of power in Tudor England, shaping the kingdom's destiny in ways both subtle and profound. Born in 1512 into a family with strong scholarly traditions, Dee's early education laid the groundwork for a lifetime devoted to learning. He was a prodigy of classical languages, mathematics, and astronomy, skills that were becoming increasingly vital as England sought to expand its horizons, literally and figuratively, through exploration and scientific advancement. Unlike the political operatives who thrived by navigating the treacherous waters of court favor, Dee sought to command authority through knowledge and the promise of new discoveries. By the reign of Elizabeth I, John Dee had become one of the Queen's closest advisors in matters both practical and mystical. His counsel was sought on navigation and cartography, critical fields in an era when England was beginning its voyages across the Atlantic, challenging the dominance of Spain and Portugal. Dee's mathematical expertise helped lay the intellectual foundation for these ventures, promoting the idea that England could become a great maritime power. Yet Dee's ambitions extended far beyond navigation charts. He was fascinated by the occult, convinced that hidden knowledge could unlock secrets of the universe and grant access to divine wisdom. This quest led him to delve into astrology, alchemy, and angelic communication. Dee maintained extensive diaries and notebooks documenting his attempts to contact angels through the use of scrying, a method involving crystal balls or reflective surfaces. These mystical experiments attracted both curiosity and suspicion, placing Dee in a precarious position between the realms of science and superstition. His role at court was similarly dual in nature. Elizabeth valued his intellectual gifts and allowed him a certain freedom, but the line between genius and heresy was perilously thin. England was still recovering from religious upheaval, and any hint of sorcery could invite accusations that might ruin a man. Dee's reputation waxed and waned depending on political tides, and his esoteric interests made him vulnerable to detractors eager to dismiss him as a charlatan or worse. Despite these risks, Dee's contributions to English exploration were substantial. He advocated for voyages of discovery, producing detailed maps and proposing ambitious plans for colonization. His vision helped shape the intellectual climate that encouraged adventurers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh. Dee saw England's imperial destiny as intertwined with knowledge, not just of lands, but of the cosmos itself. However, the latter years of Dee's life were marked by misfortune. Political changes, shifting religious attitudes, and the relentless march of time left him increasingly isolated. His angelic communications were dismissed by skeptics, and his once respected position at court faded. Dee died in relative obscurity, his vast libraries and papers scattered, many lost to history. Yet the imprint of his work endured, influencing both the scientific revolution and the esoteric traditions that followed. John Dee's story reveals a different kind of power in Tudor England, the power of ideas and knowledge to shape empire and belief. Unlike Cromwell's legislative reforms or Mary Tudor's dynastic choices, Dee's influence was less direct, but no less significant. He embodied the tensions of an era straddling the medieval and the modern, where science, magic, and politics intertwined in complex ways. From the administrative mastery of Cromwell to the personal defiance of Mary Tudor, and now to the intellectual quests of John Dee, we see a pattern emerge. Tudor England was a crucible where diverse forms of power, political, familial, and intellectual, collided and coalesced. Each figure navigated their own challenges and shaped the kingdom's trajectory in unique ways, often at great personal risk. Building on the intellectual and mystical legacy left by John Dee, we move now to another figure whose influence was equally significant, though rooted more in the shadows of Tudor politics and espionage. Sir Francis Walsingham, often dubbed the spymaster of Elizabeth I, was a man who operated behind curtains and coded letters, weaving a network of intelligence that protected the Queen and secured England's place in a turbulent Europe. Walsingham was born in the early 1530s into a gentry family with strong connections, yet his rise was less about noble birth and more about shrewd service and unyielding loyalty. Educated in law and experienced abroad as a diplomat, he returned to England with a sharp mind and an unwavering dedication to the Protestant cause. His era was one fraught with conspiracies, religious conflict, and foreign plots, all of which made the Queen's survival precarious and intelligence crucial. By the 1570s, Walsingham had become principal secretary to Elizabeth I, a position that placed him at the heart of government. But what set him apart was his creation of one of the first state-sponsored spy networks in history. This network extended across Europe, employing agents and informants who gathered information on Catholic plots, foreign alliances, and internal dissent. His efforts were instrumental in uncovering the Babington Plot, a conspiracy that aimed to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. The unraveling of this conspiracy was a masterstroke of espionage. Walsingham's agents intercepted coded letters, decoded messages, and fed Elizabeth precise intelligence that allowed her to act decisively. The capture and subsequent execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, though controversial, secured the Protestant succession and thwarted Spanish designs on England. In this way, Walsingham's work was not merely defensive. It shaped the course of English history by maintaining Elizabeth's grip on the throne and enabling the Protestant Reformation to take firm root. His network was ruthless and efficient, employing techniques that ranged from surveillance to torture, reflecting the brutal realities of Tudor statecraft. Yet Walsingham believed that these measures were necessary to safeguard a fragile realm beset by threats on multiple fronts. The balance he struck between security and severity earned him both admiration and fear, but no one could doubt the effectiveness of his system. Walsingham's legacy extends beyond his lifetime. He laid the foundations for modern intelligence agencies, demonstrating the importance of information control in governance and warfare. His example showed that in a world of shifting alliances and religious wars, knowledge could be as powerful as armies and navies. Without his vigilance, England's trajectory toward becoming a global power might have been derailed. Like Cromwell and Walsingham's life illustrates the diverse ways Tudor England was shaped not just by kings and queens, but by those who mastered different kinds of influence: administrative, intellectual, and clandestine. His story also highlights the darker side of Tudor rule, where paranoia and suspicion bred a culture of surveillance that extended into private lives. As we follow these figures, Cromwell with his reforms, Mary Tudor with her defiance, Dee with his knowledge, and Walsingham with his espionage, a fuller picture of Tudor England emerges. It was a realm where power was multifaceted and survival depended on adaptability, loyalty, and sometimes ruthless pragmatism. Continuing this journey through the layers of Tudor influence, we now turn to a figure whose contributions reshaped not the machinery of government or the secret networks of spies, but the very cultural fabric of England. William Shakespeare, though often celebrated simply as a literary genius, was also a subtle but powerful force in the Tudor era, a figure whose plays, poems, and public presence reflected, reinforced, and sometimes questioned the social and political currents of his time. Shakespeare's exact birth date is debated, but he entered the world in Stratford-upon-Avon in the mid-15th century's final decade. His early life remains largely mysterious, yet by the mid-16th century, he had moved to London and begun to make his mark on the thriving theatrical scene. What set Shakespeare apart was his extraordinary ability to capture the complexities of human nature and the turbulent realities of Tudor England, monarchy, religion, war, ambition, and identity, within the compelling narratives of his plays. During Elizabeth's reign, theater was not merely entertainment. It was a vital arena for exploring and shaping public opinion. Shakespeare's works often engaged with questions of power and legitimacy. Plays like Richard III and Henry IV dramatized the struggles for the throne and the burdens of kingship, inviting audiences to reflect on the nature of authority and the cost of ambition. His histories, tragedies, and comedies provided a mirror to the anxieties and hopes of a nation still finding its place after decades of religious upheaval and dynastic uncertainty. Shakespeare was also a master of ambiguity, weaving subtext and layered characters that could be interpreted in multiple ways, sometimes flattering the monarchy, other times subtly critiquing it. This skillful balance allowed him to navigate the perilous politics of the era without incurring royal wrath, while still engaging with controversial themes such as succession crises and religious tensions. His plays became a site where ideas could be tested and expressed under the veil of fiction. Beyond the stage, Shakespeare's involvement with patronage networks tied him closely to influential courtiers and nobles, connecting the cultural with the political. His patron, the Earl of Southampton, was a prominent figure sympathetic to many of the progressive ideas circulating in Elizabethan England. Through these relationships, Shakespeare's work reached an elite audience while simultaneously captivating the wider public. The impact of Shakespeare's artistry extended well beyond his lifetime. His exploration of power, identity, and human nature contributed to the development of English national consciousness during a period when the country was asserting itself on the world stage. His writings helped codify the English language and provided shared stories and characters that would become touchstones for generations. In this way, Shakespeare was as much a participant in Tudor power dynamics as the courtiers and ministers whose names fill history books. His influence was cultural and intellectual, shaping how the Tudor state was imagined and understood both at home and abroad. The ability to craft narrative, to influence perception, and to stir emotion proved as vital to Tudor England's endurance as armies or alliances. Tracing a line from Cromwell's legal reforms through Mary Tudor's dynastic choices, John Dee's intellectual pursuits, Walsingham's espionage, and now Shakespeare's cultural legacy, we see the multifaceted nature of influence in Tudor England. It was an era where power wore many masks: political, personal, mystical, clandestine, and artistic, and where survival depended on navigating these overlapping spheres with skill and sometimes luck. Bringing together the threads woven by these remarkable figures, Thomas Cromwell, Mary Tudor, John Dee, Francis Walsingham, and William Shakespeare, paints a vivid mosaic of Tudor England's complex and multifaceted power dynamics. Each of these individuals, operating in vastly different arenas, exemplifies how the Tudor era was shaped not just by the monarchs whose portraits dominate history books, but by those who maneuvered behind the scenes, whose ideas, choices, and actions rippled outward to define an age. Cromwell's rise from modest origins to the pinnacle of political power was a testament to the transformative possibilities of the Tudor state. Through his reforms and religious policies, he helped redefine England's governance and religious landscape, moving it decisively away from medieval structures toward a centralized, bureaucratic monarchy. His fate, falling victim to the king's volatile favor, underscored the perilous nature of Tudor politics, where power was immense but always precarious. Mary Tudor's story, by contrast, highlighted the subtle yet profound influence of royal family dynamics. Her choice to marry for love rather than political expediency challenged expectations and left a legacy that would echo in succession crises decades later. Her life illustrated the tension between personal agency and dynastic duty, a tension that many women of the period faced, but few navigated so boldly. John Dee, straddling the worlds of science, mysticism, and imperial ambition, embodied the intellectual ferment of the Renaissance within Tudor England. His vision of knowledge as a tool for national expansion and divine favor reflected the era's thirst for discovery and power beyond traditional military or political means. Dee's story reveals the era's contradictions, the coexistence of faith and reason, magic and emerging science, hope and skepticism. In the shadows of court intrigue, Francis Walsingham's mastery of espionage kept Elizabeth's reign secure amid conspiracies and external threats. His development of a spy network was groundbreaking, turning information into one of the most potent weapons of statecraft. Walsingham's life showed that Tudor power was not just about visible displays of authority, but also about the unseen forces guarding and manipulating the fragile web of rule. Finally, Shakespeare's cultural genius gave voice and shape to the Tudor experience itself. His plays and poetry captured the hopes, fears, and complexities of a nation in transition. Shakespeare did not wield swords or sign edicts, yet his influence in molding English identity and reflecting the human condition ensured his place among the most enduring figures of the era. Through art, he engaged with the same themes of power, legitimacy, and ambition that defined the political struggles of his time. Together, these five figures illustrate that Tudor England was a realm of intertwined powers: administrative, dynastic, intellectual, secretive, and cultural. Their stories remind us that history is rarely the product of a single person or event, but a tapestry of diverse forces and personalities. They navigated a world where survival demanded constant adaptation, where loyalty could be both a shield and a trap, and where ambition could either elevate or destroy. Their legacies continue to resonate because they reveal the human dimensions of power, the risks taken, the ideals pursued, the compromises made. In understanding these unsung heroes, we gain a fuller, richer picture of the Tudor era, not just as a time of kings and queens, but as a dynamic period shaped by extraordinary individuals whose impacts were profound even if their names are less remembered. This exploration also invites reflection on the nature of influence itself. It takes many forms, sometimes public and celebrated, other times secret and subdued. It can flow through policies and armies, through family ties and hidden messages, through knowledge and art. The Tudor age, with all its turbulence and transformation, is a powerful reminder that history's true architects are often those working beyond the crowns and courts, in the shadows and margins, yet leaving marks that shape the future in lasting ways.